Good morning, students and faculty, ladies and gentlemen, fellow veterans, distinguished guests. I'm Commander Tom Bitters, American Legion Post 342 here in Lena. Welcome to our 2012 Veterans Day observance. In the fall of 2004, my wife Kay and I were in Washington, D.C. We took some time to visit Arlington National Cemetery. A military escort of the Army's Old Guard was conducting a burial. After the firing squad fired its salute of 3 volleys, a lone bugler played taps. When he finished, I leaned over and whispered to my wife, "That's the guy, that's the guy. I don't care what it takes, but if I die first, I want you to get that guy to play taps at my funeral." It's hard for me to explain why that hauntingly beautiful melody of just 24 notes causes so much emotion. But I get a lump in my throat and a tear in my eye every time I hear it. Today, our Veterans Day observance will look at the origin and the history of bugle calls, and especially reflect on taps. Thank you.
This morning I'd like to introduce you to the veterans that are here. And we'll also be telling you about the branch of service that they were in the area that they served in, the time they served. So this morning we have Mr. Robert Peachy. Please stand. Robert served in the Army in Korea. Alan Cosner served in the United States Marine Corps in World War II. Lee Guzek served in the U.S. Air Force, Vietnam. Lyle Jonke served in the U.S. Army, Vietnam. Richard Close served in the U.S. Army, Vietnam, and Germany. Russ Burr served in the U.S. Navy, 1967-1971. Tom Bitters served in the U.S. Army, Vietnam. Kenny Sladke served in the U.S. Army, Germany. Clint Wenzel served the U.S. Navy during the Cold War and the Mediterranean Sea. Bill Drager served the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force during World War II and Korea. Armin van der Heijden served the U.S. Army, World War II. Walter Simonson served the U.S. Marine Corps, Korea. Clem Harley served the U.S. Navy. Wally Pelishek is in our bleachers today, served the Air Force in Korea. Paul Van Nuren served the U.S. Army, Vietnam. Ron Mishko Served in the U.S. Air Force, Vietnam. William Pedleski served in the U.S. Navy in World War II. James Wade served in the U.S. Army during the Cold War. Bill Padma served in the U.S. Army, Vietnam. Al Christofferson served in the U.S. Navy during the Cold War. Daryl Kajava served in the U.S. Army, Germany. Ron Aubry served in the U.S. Army, Korea. Lou Manjat served in the U.S. Army, Vietnam. John Sheffin served in the U.S. Air Force, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. And I'm Cal Thompson. I served in the U.S. Army in the Persian Gulf during Desert Storm. Let's give all these vets a hand.
My name is Russ Burr. I would like to say a few words about the National Society of the Sons of the American Revolution, in which I am a member. It is an organization that was formed in 1889, chartered by the United States Congress in 1906. The objectives of the society are declared to be patriotic, historical, and educational, and shall include those intended or designed to perpetuate the memory of those who by their services or sacrifices during the War of the American Revolution. Today, there are over 33,000 National Society members living in all 50 states and in a number of foreign countries. Each member can trace their ancestry to one or more patriots of the Revolutionary War, ranging from those who served as soldiers or sailors to those who were general supporters of the revolutionary cause. Would you please escort Connie Kramer? Compatriot Jim Wade, former state president and our present state award chairman, is escorting Connie Kramer to the podium. The Wisconsin Society of the Sons of the American Revolution and the Captain Henry Appelmont chapter would like to present a flag certificate to Mrs. Connie Kramer for her patriotic display of the United States flag in a place of honor at the Lena Community Veterans Memorial Park. Connie tries to maintain and expand the meaning of patriotism and to show us how to respect our national symbols. We would also at this time would like to present Connie with a Good Citizenship Medal and certificate for her tireless effort in building the Lena Community Veterans Memorial Park. Through her efforts, she raised thousands of dollars and directed in the planning of the Veterans Memorial Park to what we have today. Connie Kramer inspires the community with the principles on which our nation was founded, and she also inspires us by how she exhibits her personal courage as she battles cancer. As we honor our veterans today, please remember to say thank you to our veterans for their service to our country. But please also say thank you to Connie for her service to our veterans and to our community. Thank you.
Morning. This year, the military celebrates the 100th anniversary of TAPS. It's a special bugle call familiar to almost every American. But where did the playing of bugles in the military begin? And why were they used? The bugle was first used as a signal instrument in the American Army during the Revolutionary War. The bugle calls evolved from Continental Army contacts with the French and the English armies during the Revolutionary War. And in the early years of our nation's independence, each arm and branch of the Army developed its own set of sound signals and drum beats in the infantry and bugle calls in the cavalry and artillery. By the end of the Civil War, the artillery, cavalry, and infantry were sounding bugle calls. In 1867, General Emory Upton directed Major Truman Seymour, the 5th U.S. Artillery, to prepare a definitive system of calls with the object of eliminating the confusion that was evident during the Civil War. Major Seymour reviewed all the calls then in use in the Army. He discarded some of them, and he revised a few others, and he finally fashioned the set of calls which have remained in use up to the present time. In 1867, bugle calls were standardized for all branches of the Army. The enlisted soldier's life was regulated by bugle calls. The daily routine included breakfast, dinner, and supper calls, fatigue call, drill call, stable and water calls, sick call, and of course, TAPS. And on Sundays, the church call was added to the daily schedule. So what is a bugle call? A bugle call is a short tune that originated as a military signal, that it announced a scheduled and sometimes certain non-scheduled events on a military installation, like a base, or the battlefield, or perhaps a ship. Historically, bugles and drums and other loud musical instruments were used for clear communication in the noise and confusion of the battlefield. Naval bugle calls also used to command the crew of many of the warships. Bugle calls typically indicate the change in a daily routine of camp. Every duty around the camp had its own bugle call, and since the cavalry had horses to look after, they had twice as many signals as the regular infantry. Bugle calls, therefore, were more common in our older war times, especially during the Civil War and World War I. But as technologies grew, the use of the bugle for signals during battles, they ceased. And only times of military personnel began to hear them would be if they were stationed in a military base. Many of the military personnel that we have here today only remember a few of the calls that could be made by a bugle because they were actively engaged in a battle, and with the modern communications advances, the bugle was no longer needed to tell the troops what to do or where to go. This could now be done with radio communications. So many of today's men and women at our many military installations will still hear the call of the bugle to wake them up in the morning, or for retiring the colors at the end of the day. And many times this might even be done with a digital recording. But they will not hear the bugle sounded if they're in a battle anymore. So times have changed. But the bugle is still used especially for special occasions, and that would be for TAPS. So today we have a special person here. We have Mr. John Sheffin. Mr. Sheffin is a member of the American Legion Post 342, the Donny de Grave, and he's their bugler. And he's present with us here today to help explain some of the calls that he remembers. John uses a World War I regulation bugle. And he graciously said, as we talk about it today, that I could play a few of those for you so that you could hear some of the calls. So welcome, John. So, do you mind if we ask you, John, how old you are?
I'm 84 years old. In August, I was 84.
That's wonderful. And can you tell us again what branches of service you were in and what wars or what military bases you were at?
I came in right at the end of World War II, and I joined the AAF, Army Air Force. And then it became in 47, last part of 47, it became United States Air Force, separate branch. And I was in from 46 until 66. So I was at the end of World War II. Then I went to, flew the Berlin airlift in 1948. We hauled food and stuff into Berlin. We had a corridor that we had to fly down and fly back. And then I came back to the States after it was over with. And I was stationed in Kelly Field, Texas, where I flew air evac for prisoners, not for prisoners, but for people with frozen feet and things like that. And I was transferred from there to Tachikawa, Japan, where food resupplied to Korea every day, back and forth. 4 hours over, 4 hours back, all things over, all things back. And then when I got back, we got a new airplane, C-124, that was flying the C-54s before that. We got the C-124s, and then I started flying there, and I became a flight engineer. Then I transferred back to the States. Excuse me. I was stationed in McCord Air Force Base, and that's where when Rita, my wife Rita, stand up there. We got married, and we had started our family up there, and I flew to Alaska, and I flew to Germany, and I flew all over, back and forth, Hawaii. And when my tour was up at McCord Air Force Base in Tacoma, I went down to Travis Air Force Base, where I was stationed there for 11 years, flying the C-124, big one. I could, if you look on my back when I stand up, I got a picture of the airplane. It's sewed into the back of the jacket. And I flew back and forth. We had our children there. We had first Mary Ann, who was our #1 girl. Then we had a little boy that died. And then we turned around and had the rest of our kids down at Travis Air Force Base, where I retired from after flying about 12,000 hours just in the C-124. So that's a big old airplane. And then I flew, from there I flew to Vietnam, and I flew the last thing I flew was the Cuban crisis down in Cuba with President Kennedy. We lobbed a missile at the deck of the airplane, the boat that was bringing the missiles, and they turned around and went back. So anyway, that's where I was at. Thank you.
So, as you can tell, John, as you listen to him, you can see that he was stationed at quite a few bases and military bases, and as we were talking, that's where many times we would have our military calls. And so probably the first call that you heard in the mornings was what?
Reveille. Reveille was, you gotta get up, you gotta get up, you gotta get up this morning. Well, first it's time to get up, time to get up, time to get up in the morning. And then it goes, you gotta get up, you gotta get up, you gotta get up this day.
I'll try. Tell you to get up, right? You had to get up. And there were other calls that would go on in between, perhaps depending on what base they were at, but that was one of them. You said that there was even a call to come to mess. Mess means to come for dinner or supper or chow, whatever you want, whatever it was time to eat, and that was called mess call. Yes, what did they say? Should I play it first and then you say it?
Go ahead. Chow, boys, come and get your chow. Come and get your chow, boys, come and get your chow. Come and get your chow, boys, come and get your chow.
So even on the base sometimes, you know, they got paid. And they really like to get paid because that's when they can go out and do things. Now, he can only tell you the words for part of this, right? Because he can only tell a little bit of part. Because you know, in the military, sometimes the men didn't say all the right.
Payday. Go ahead. Payday, payday, what you gonna do with a drunken sailor? Payday, payday, payday.
Now, we don't listen over here about that, but you know over here when payday came where they probably went with some of that day. And so he couldn't repeat everything they did with that drunken sailor. But that was an example of that. Perhaps one of the most memorable calls, so when John and I were talking a few weeks back, was the call that it's called To the Colors. And do you want me to play it first or do you want me to explain it first? Okay, we'll play a little bit of this. I don't think I'll play the whole thing. We'll start. This was used if there wasn't a band around to play the national anthem, and the flag was coming down at this time, wasn't it? So you tell us what happened, like if you were driving a car, what happened on the base, what did all the men have to do?
The base had a lot of loudspeakers, and a real loud one. And if you were driving your car at 4:30, about 4:45 at night, they played Retreat, which was da 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 da. So and then when that was done, the cannon would loudly go boom on the base, and then you would get out of your car and stand there and salute. Of course, you'd be out of your car before that, standing at parade rest. So.
You want to show parade rest? Yeah.